بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا زدنا علما وتقوى وبارك في أوقاتنا وفي أقوالنا وفي أفعالنا، تقبل منا ولا تأخذنا بقصورنا. I wanted to talk about the concept of human nature as it's understood in the Deen. And I wanted to talk about regarding, self-monitoring and accountability. A lot of times, the way that we are practicing religion in today's time, we don't want to take into account the reality of the human being. And so we're operating out of these concepts in which we're dealing with people outside of the boundaries of human terms. And this is where we begin to get into bad religion. Because once you eliminate the human being from the matrix, so to speak, of religiosity, you start to fall into a serious problem. Religion is not for, or the Deen, let's say, in our expression of the Deen is what we can call religion. The Deen remains independent, but related to how we express our religiosity. So we have to separate between sometimes the concepts that we have of religion and the Deen itself. And so when the necessity of Deen, when we look at the meaning of Deen, is a repayment that we're giving back to the Creator for an allegiance that we took, and for an accountability. That allegiance has to do with the fact that we took a pledge, acknowledging the Creator, acknowledging the Prophet. That's the Shahada, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then we have the responsibility of how we maneuver in the world, what types of choices we make, and so on and so forth. That's basic understanding. But in the midst of all that, we have certain needs. We were created with these needs as human beings. So then the Deen comes, and then we begin to develop an expression of our religiosity, of how we're going to practice the Deen. The Deen comes to deal with how we manage our needs in the world. It's as simple as that. When we look deeply, who is it that needs the Deen? Right? And so that's why we say when we eliminate the human being from the picture, it becomes problematic. Allah doesn't need Deen. Right? There's no repayment that Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala needs. Allah is self-sufficient. Allah doesn't need the worship of human beings. If Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala wanted to, Allah could restructure the reality of the universe and the earth as it is and bring a new creation. You have to remember that human beings are given a distinct nature from angels. Angels are in a constant state of obedience. But human beings are tasked with the whole reality of maneuvering through the world with some concept of choice between this and that, and accountability. And so that's the first thing that we have to examine ourselves. We have to monitor ourselves and bring ourselves to account. But bringing ourselves to account, it has to be within the framework of what it is that we need. That's why when we talk about religiosity, we can measure false religiosity from good religiosity, and how much it is that our religiosity upholds the dignity of the human being, establishes justice, takes care of the needs of human beings. We're not dealing with angels. We're dealing with people that have real issues. They have economic issues, political issues, emotional issues. There's breakdown issues in society, in families, in friendships, in relationships, in communities. If religion is not helping in that point, because the Deen definitely helps in that. But if our expression of the deen, which we call religion, if it's not helping, then we need to, have a revision of how it is that we understand the deen. How it is that we're navigating religiosity, because there's no doubt that human needs are what they are. They're things that have to be satisfied. And social scientists, as well as when we look and we reflect upon Revelation, they give us some insight as to what it is that human beings need. Human beings need to be regarded and respected. They need to be recognized. They need to have an experience of love. You have to have an ability to be able to do for yourself. Those are realities. When there's a deprivation in those areas, it becomes very hard to maneuver. That's just factual. It becomes hard to maneuver. Not just, you may be able to get by and paying your bills. You may be able to do well materially, but then in other realms, you may not be doing too well. That's where you begin to see that everything is not just about material achievement and gain. Everything's not about material achievement and gain. There's some spiritual dimensions to that, but everything also is not about the spiritual dimension. There's material needs that have to be fulfilled, and there is a certain amount of material gain, but it's not the material gain necessarily that the capitalist society is looking for. Everybody's racing to be a billionaire, right? And you look at that type of approach and that type of orientation, how it is. Is one in which the rest of humanity, there's no real concern for the rest of humanity. So you have people that pursue the wealth game to such an extent that they don't care how it is that they attain to their wealth. They're no different than drug dealers and robbers and thieves and people who are considered to be the lower levels of society. As a matter of fact, they may be worse, because they may be the ones that create the conditions that force people to, rob and do what they do in order to survive. But in closing, our concept, our practice of the deen itself, our religiosity, right, is not equivalent to the deen. But our religiosity in and of itself has to be considered of human need. So that means we have to have a certain knowledge of ourselves. What is essential, what's not essential. And then we have to look at, real world conditions. Real world conditions. One of the things that's definitely needed, which is missing, is the issue of love, like real love. And that operates on multiple levels. It operates on the level of emotion and affection, consideration, regard. It operates on attention. It operates on the level of doing for the other person, sacrificing for the other person. That's very real. Standing up for the other person. That's where the issue of love it has multiple dimensions. Love is a complicated issue. A lot of times we really don't understand love. There's one aspect of love that the Quran mentions. I'll close with this. فَإِن كُنتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحِبِّبُكُمُ اللَّهُ. And in the Quran it talks about, if it is the case that you love Allah, then follow the Prophet, and then Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala will love you. Right? So in this case, the love is shown as an exemplification of the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, internally and externally. That's not easy. That's not easy. It's easier said than done. It takes some effort. But that's one dimension of love. But there's other aspects that you begin to see. Manifestations of love on the human level. Sometimes some of it is cultural too. I think as Muslims sometimes we mix out the cultural reality, or we emphasize it overboard. You know what I'm saying? But there is, there's some things that's needed, like communities to be whole, people to be around their own people that look like them, that speak like them, but in a wholesome way, and be accepted in that community as being part of it, and recognized as that, and recognizing you being part of that community. There's a level of love there that's missing for many of us because of the types of destruction that have occurred, societally and politically and economically and historically. All of those dimensions interact with each other. And so it creates a situation or an environment in which love, as the village, so to speak, it doesn't get to manifest itself. And that's and it's needed. It's needed. We try to deny that. And then if you can't be in your tribe, so to speak, ideally, if we want to talk about the Islamic dynamics, there should be a tribe to adopt you. But that's not mostly the case amongst the Muslims. That's where there's a developmental issue that's needed to be addressed, a human need issue. Each tribe has to be developed. Each tribe has to be developed. Each tribe has to look at its needs, and that's where the concept of the doing for the self comes in at. That's why we say that the Deen has to deal with human needs, and we have to take an account of ourselves and monitor ourselves. Like, where are we at? Where are we at in terms of our mission in the world and our situations that we're in? I think like within the last few years, especially, in trying to really implement these ideas, that you see the impact, you see the difference. There was a time when the Muslim was recognized in the community as being one that cared about the community. And so people looked at the Muslim as one who had the interest of the community in mind. That type of relationship with the community, it didn't have anything to do with faith. It had to do with confidence that the community had in that person. Just like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was known to be the trustworthy, that was the position of the Muslim in the community. We've lost that. We've lost that. And so, and so communities need that. They need to be able to look to certain people and know, yeah, they have our back. They have our protection. Yeah, they have our best interests in mind. And people need to feel like they're in a community like that. That's where the human need comes in. I'm not trying to just limit human need to my own personal need in this kind of reflection, right? Because I wanted to close on this note. But we have to look beyond just, we have needs on an individual level that overlap with community needs. And if we don't understand human nature in that regard, we will always be lost. The Eurocentric framework has destroyed that concept and isolated us, siloed us into as being individuals, right? So that we're isolated. We isolate ourselves and we can't even communicate with each other. And again, that's a human need issue. You have to be able to communicate, come from communion, community. All of that stuff there is an interaction that has to be healthy that we have with one another, and acceptance and so on and so forth that allows us to elevate. There was at one time a theory in psychology, Eurocentric psychology, it was a little better than some of the stuff that you find, that it talked about the development of the individual takes place in the context of the community. So you reflect the community reflects you, and your identity begins to evolve from there. And you're affirmed by that community, you're loved by and nurtured, just like the way that the child grows up in a family. And the child reflects what goes on in the family, and the family reaffirms, the child, and that child develops in that environment. It takes language, it takes values, it takes culture from what goes on in those dynamics. And the nurturing has a lot to do with the needs of the child, basic needs at the level of love, at the level of safety, security, care, nurturing. And then you go to the higher levels. If we want to use a modern, psychological frame, the highest level is self-actualization. But what I would add on to that Eurocentric framework is some other concepts that come from the indigenous is, self-actualization in the community. Not just self-actualization for myself, but self-actualization in the community, in communion with others, right? And that's where the Deen becomes the vehicle for that. Our understanding of Islam has to be that. It can't be mystically complicated, where it's not practical, where it's not suitable to deal with our situations. That's problematic, because that means that now is not an effective way of dealing with our issues. We're going to go somewhere else to deal with our issues. Just like water has to flow, and if there's a blockage, water will go around that blockage. The same thing with the soul. But sometimes what happens is that you go around the blockages, you find yourself on the wrong path, trying to figure out. A lot of people out here that are considered bad is because they're looking for the right way to go into. They're looking for the right way to go into. And so because there's a frustration of the natural process they end up going into a self-destructive process. I don't understand why we can't conceptualize that sometimes, right? And that's why I said before earlier, you look at criminality in these types of societies, this stuff is not natural. Even some say, like in places like Africa, there was no jails and all of that type of stuff because the community, enforced certain things. The community enforced certain things. Even in the tribe, you couldn't get away. If you look in indigenous groups, you can't get away with certain things when you violate within the context of the tribe. But even though the tribe recognizes you, you have your own name and so on and so forth. But you can't, in those types of examples, you begin to see that there is a disruption of dealing with human need, right? And we're at the point where, people are straight homeless, they're derelict, they're depressed, they're intoxicated, all of that, because human need is frustrated. And Deen takes care of human need. Before you go to the higher levels, there's no salah, there's none of that unless you have life existent. If you can't preserve human life, you're not going to have the practice of other aspects of the Deen. And that's something to take a note of. That's why we always have to take account of ourselves, right? And we have to take account and inventory, what's going on? What are we doing? Where's our own development? Where's our development? And like I said, that development has to be in the context of the community. And that's what makes it difficult. When you see your people being destroyed in the land, and you're woke, so to speak, and you see that, and it becomes difficult to be able to interact with the community, to be able to uplift, that becomes a challenge. That becomes a serious challenge. But still, even with all that, the prophets took on those types of responsibilities. I'll leave on this note. Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he saw his people being destroyed. If you don't believe me, look at the beginning of Sirah. I've been reflecting on this for years now. And there's different angles that I take from it. But if you look at the time of Jahiliyyah, he saw his people being destroyed. And included in his people was his immediate family and extended family and others. And he was thrown aback by that. Right? He was thrown aback by that. And Allah Ta'ala revealed the Quran to address the issue. Right, to try to come out of that, but he had to take on the responsibility of doing the work, and that's the Deen that we got. When we take it back to Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, rahmatullahi alayhi, Malcolm X, that's what we got. We got an understanding of how it is can we correct the situation of our people on multiple levels. Some of us talk about spirituality, and there's room and time for that. But then we don't talk about economics or the political reality or the issue of dignity and other things like that, family structure. And some of us talk about the political side. We don't talk about spirituality. There's deep imbalances. Or we talk about the individual being successful, but not the group being successful. There's deep imbalances. So that's why we have to, examine ourselves, see where we stand on these issues, take ourselves to account, and see where our needs are at. Right now, the biggest thing, and I'm definitely leaving on this note, the biggest thing right now is the breakdown of relationships in the family. People need love. We're not talking about the level of the breakdown that exists out here. And it's creating perversity. It's creating perversity in the way that people interact and how they conceive of things. You can't frustrate people's need for love and they expect that anything healthy is going to come out of that. And that's with the relationship breakdown, that's what we have. We have people are losing confidence in marriage. They're losing confidence in being lovable, and they're losing confidence in loving. And once you have that, then what is the future of the youth? What is the future of the children? If you don't have any healthy environment for that child to come into that will nurture that child in a 360 way, not just at the level of minerals and vitamins, but even at the level of intellect, at the level of emotion, at the level of identity, everything. If you don't have healthy families, and that starts with relationship between husband and wives, and that starts with brothers being with brothers and sisters being with sisters and community. You don't have that, your future's gone. Assalamu alaikum.